Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. The breaks go on at req'd. The Prime Minister says there's still too many COVID cases in hospital to go orange. It'll be reviewed again ahead of Easter. But it's ka kite to vax passes at bars, cafes and gyms from tomorrow morning. It's supposed to be a bumper season for Southland farmers. Instead, it's painfully dry. We're on the farm. From one Vegas to another, the Ashburton opera singer who features on a record that won Grammy Gold in Las Vegas. We're in Hamilton for Black Caps batter Ross Taylor's final innings. And potato chips, what more is there to say other than yum yum? We talk to a Kiwi company crushing the chip market in Oz. Check us out live, Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Cabinet has agreed to keep the entire country at the red traffic light setting due to sustained pressure on the health system. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says while case numbers are moving in the right direction, the Omicron outbreak is far from over. She says up-to-date public health advice shows hospitalisations aren't expected to peak in some DHBs until mid to late April. Ms Ardern says it's not the time to ease the setting.
I know there is an eagerness to move to orange, but we are still frankly amid an outbreak and there is still pressure across our hospital network. 98% of all COVID cases to date have occurred in the past 90 days. And with the wave moving down the country still, we need to be mindful of the pressure on healthcare nationally.
Cabinet will next review the traffic light settings on Thursday. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says there's evidence of war crimes at the hands of Russia and its President Vladimir Putin. She says reports of Ukrainian civilians killed, raped and severely wounded is beyond reprehensible and Russia will be held to account. She says New Zealand continues to support prosecutors investigating war crimes in Ukraine. An Auckland restaurateur hopes she'll have fewer cancelled bookings when vaccine mandates are lifted late tonight. From midnight tonight, hospitality and close proximity businesses will no longer have to check vaccine passes unless they choose to. Mandy Lusk, the co-owner of Vivace restaurant in central Auckland, says the requirement has scared off some long-term customers who she doesn't think will return. She's looking forward to the mandate being scrapped.
We are overjoyed that it's going. It felt a little bit at times like we were being blackmailed. We were being forced to become police, if you like, for something that discriminated against some people for their own beliefs.
Mandy Lusk predicts businesses will still see far fewer customers than normal until office workers return to the city under the orange traffic light setting. The tide of people moving out of Auckland for greener pastures in other parts of the country has increased during the pandemic. Auckland's net loss stood at 13,500 residents last year, a couple of thousand more than previous years. Sociologist and Massey University Distinguished Emeritus Professor Paul Spoonley says the pandemic has also likely played a part in many people's decisions to move.
Well, I think it's very much a function of COVID and the possibilities of either people losing their jobs in the main centres and looking to move somewhere else, perhaps a little cheaper, or the possibility that they're now working from home or from a distance.
Paul Spoonley says he's concerned about the potential brain drain out of New Zealand in coming months. A family planning nurse removed a contraceptive implant from an intellectually impaired teenager and gave her condoms against the family's wishes. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the 16-year-old had the mental capacity of a child, was unable to understand the consequences of sexual conduct and was at risk of being sexually exploited. A family member had asked for the implant not to be removed until they gave the nurse more information about the teenager's impairment. The Commissioner says family planning breached the Health and Disability Services Code by not having the right support in place for the girl to make a decision. And a New Zealand tenor whose performance helped to win a Grammy Award says it was a group effort. The recording of Gustav Mahler's Symphony No. 8 featuring Simon O'Neill clinched Best Choral Performance. Mr O'Neill says there were about 370 musicians on stage, with over 100 in the orchestra, 4 or 5 choirs and 8 soloists.
Whilst I'm so over the moon that the recording has won the Grammy, I think really the Grammy winner is only one person really, and that's Gustavo Dudamel, who's the conductor. I think all of us are just contributors to that, and I'll take that any day.
Simon O'Neill says it's great to see opera and classical music celebrated in his home country. To sport, and a 203-run second wicket stand between Martin Guptill and Will Young has the Black Caps on course for a total of 300 plus in their third and final one-dayer against the Netherlands in Hamilton. I'm just seeing if that's been updated. Sorry about that. Here we go. Batting first, the home side a short time ago was 238 for 2 in the 41st over, with Martin Guptill scoring his 17th ODI century, dismissed for 106. Will Young has just brought up his century too and is on 101. Ross Taylor in his final game for New Zealand has just come to the crease at Seddon Park and has received a standing ovation. Greymouth's squash world number 1, Paul Cole, intends holding on to the top ranking until he returns to New Zealand to celebrate his second straight British Open title. Cole defended his British crown and cemented himself as world number 1 by beating Egypt's Ali Farag in straight games in his morning's final. Cole hasn't been home for 3 years but will return to train in Greymouth before the Nationals at the start of July.
Holding the number 1 spot and winning the title, there was a huge amount of pressure on this week, and I'm just extremely proud to win that and hold my ranking, for another month at least. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on me the last couple of weeks, and I'm just really proud of myself for pulling through.
And the New Zealand golfer Steve Alker has won for the second time in the US PGA Champions Tour. Alker's enjoyed a 6-shot victory at the latest over 50s tournament in Mississippi, collecting almost $350,000 for the win. Meanwhile, Lydia Ko has finished in a tie for 24th at the first women's major of the year in California, with American Jennifer Kupcho winning the title. That's the news.
Doffing her cap to Australia's cricketers.
Australia went through the tournament without a loss.
Backing back, that's the catch. The 5-year master plan has come to fruition for Australia.
Playing shots where you kind of have to check yourself, is that actually what happened? The shots were just ridiculous.
And a victory for flood-damaged East Coasters.
We had some local people pretty much on the back of a cigarette packet sketching up a design. We knew that this plan was going to work, and it has.
Good on you, mate. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And you can download the RNZ app to your phone to listen live or listen again. You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday for all of Te Ika Maui except for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine today with isolated showers in Northland and cloud increasing from evening. Showers tomorrow, possibly heavy in Taranaki at night. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with high cloud tomorrow. Looking at Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing. Rain is developing in Fiordland this evening, then spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. For Nelson and Marlborough, except the Kokoda coast, mainly fine today. Scattered showers are developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain from the evening with heavy falls possible. For the Kokoda coast, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, areas of cloud and patchy drizzle from Kokoda to North Otago, clearing tomorrow morning. Mainly fine elsewhere, but scattered rain is developing in the far south this evening and then spreading north tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with drizzle at times. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have more news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The entire country will stay at the red traffic light setting for at least another 10 days, as Te Pirimia warns New Zealand is not out of the woods yet. Cabinet ministers reviewed the COVID-19 restrictions this afternoon, with case numbers seemingly trending downwards. But speaking at her regular post-cabinet media conference, Jacinda Ardern warned the healthcare system is still under pressure.
Hospitalisations have dropped in Auckland recently, but continue to plateau or increase in regions like Canterbury, Waikato and Northland. Hospitalisations are not expected to peak in some DHBs until mid to late April. Public health advice tells us now is not yet the time to ease the existing restrictions and drop down to orange. We're doing well, but we're still in a large Omicron outbreak in New Zealand. And while we're moving in the right direction, we're not out of the woods yet. And so for now, New Zealand will remain at red.
The red light means indoor events and venues will remain capped at 200 people. Restaurant patrons will still have to be seated to be served. No dancing on the dance floor.
Regardless of what setting we're in now, outdoor events can continue, and regardless of size. So that will have been a major change for some, but not all. For others, we do have support through the Ministry of Arts, Culture and Heritage and through MB. But I absolutely acknowledge of all the sectors, they're the ones that really are bearing the brunt.
The settings will be reviewed again next Thursday, April the 14th, before the Easter weekend. Ko taku manuhiri anae ko Chris Hipkins, the COVID response minister, joins us now. Tēnā koe, Minister.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
So why does Auckland have to wait for the rest of the country to pass their peak? Why couldn't you put Auckland in orange?
Well, we look at right the way across the country. Something we're looking very closely at. Every region, obviously, we look at hospitals. Hospitals in Auckland are still under quite a bit of pressure as well, though. I think all the trends are pointing in the right direction. So, I acknowledge that for some there's a degree of impatience out there, but I don't think anyone wants to see us move too quickly and then have to, then see our case numbers shoot back up again. And, we're trending in the right direction. We want to keep going in the right direction.
Which region is forecast to peak latest, and when will that be?
I don't have the model for every region in the country in front of me right now, but certainly, and that's quite difficult to model as well. It's not uniform. The way different regions have experienced COVID-19 isn't completely uniform across the country.
So a review before Easter. Can you give us a definitive decider for moving into orange? The one thing you're looking for at that review before Easter?
It's not as clear-cut as that. We're obviously looking at the overall trends in the response. So how many cases are we seeing on a daily basis? How many hospitalisations? How many new hospital admissions, as well as those who are in hospital? But also the demographics. We do look at the demographics of those, the complexity of the cases in hospital. So we look at something called case weightings, because not every hospitalisation is equal. Some are in and out of hospital much quicker than others. So we look at all of those things.
So were we sold a pup when we were told when we pass the peak, that's when we'll move down, because we've passed it in Auckland?
No, absolutely not. I think we are certainly heading in the right direction. We're getting closer to the point where I think we're likely to see more movement. We're just not quite there yet. If you think about it from an economic perspective only, the last thing I think people want to see is a sudden surge in cases which puts more people at home, more people having to isolate, because actually ultimately from a business perspective that's bad news as well. It means fewer staff and fewer customers. So we want to make sure we're continuing with the downward trend.
To put it in perspective, what is the R value for the Omicron outbreak right now?
Sorry, I haven't got the latest R value in front of me.
Okay. Was there anything in the health advice that you've got in making this decision about the new variant XE, which has been cited in Aussie and potentially is going to come over the border, obviously, when we open up?
No, it hasn't informed this particular decision, but it would be fair to say that we're tracking any emergence of new variants internationally very closely. So yes, that hasn't had an impact on this particular decision, because the information there is still very new about new variants, but we're monitoring that very closely.
What have you been told about levels of flu and other diseases we can expect when the borders are open, and the stress that may put on the system? What modelling have you seen?
Oh, we're certainly aware that we're likely to have a bad flu season for New Zealand. We're getting
What's
the flu
bad,
jabs
Minister?
out there.
Can you give us a bit more detail? What would you consider to be a bad flu season?
Oh, well, that's probably a question for the Minister for Health, but we're expecting to see more people, hospitalised, more people needing additional health care because of the flu. It's one of the reasons we're rolling out the flu jabs earlier. We're making sure that we're doing more of them because with the border opening again, we could have the double whammy of course, a big increase in regular, bugs and viruses having an impact alongside COVID-19 as well.
Given everything you're saying, Minister, is it likely that we are going to wait out the winter in red?
No, I think we will have a period where we're likely to get to orange, but I don't want to speak too soon. We've brought forward the next review, so that we're going to be doing that next week, because I think things are heading in the right direction. What happens in the winter is still too soon to say yet.
When will you know about forced shots? Because overseas, Australia, they're talking about people over the age of 50 potentially needing a fourth shot. What have you decided here in New Zealand?
Yeah, and they're still talking about it, same as us, but we are looking very closely at what's happening internationally there. The Americans, for example, have done a fourth shot, but for certain age cohorts, we're ready to do that. We've got the supply to do that. So really, we're just following the science, and if the science says, yep, that's what we need to do, then we're ready to move on that.
So when you talk about giving an extra booster to people who are vulnerable, you're not just talking about people with pre-existing conditions. Age could be their vulnerability.
Yeah, age is certainly a factor. So if we look at our booster rate now, we're only sitting at about, we're sitting at a low booster rate. I'd like to get a lot higher. It's at about 73% of eligible people have had their booster so far, but it's much higher in the older age cohorts. And that's actually helped us enormously with this Omicron outbreak. So getting boosters to the right people has also been very important.
Can you give us a date for a decision?
I don't think we're far off. I think we've also, been looking very closely at the boosters for teenagers, because that's another area.
So this week, you reckon you'll have a decision, Minister?
I wouldn't say this week, but I think we're certainly we're expecting to get more advice from our technical experts on that.
Okay, now that we've got the serious stuff out of the way, I've got an interview coming up later in the program that I need to get your opinion on. Crisps, chips. What's your favourite flavour?
Oh, salt and vinegar, absolutely.
Lucky this interview's already over. Thank you for joining us, Minister. That is Chris Hipkins, the COVID response minister there, and we'll get to the chips a little later in the program. It's about a New Zealand company making headway in Australia. So let us know your thoughts on crisps and chips, which flavours are in, which are out. And also, we'd love to hear from you on the COVID decision today as well, obviously. It is 5:15. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. So it's ka kite to the mandatory My Vaccine Pass stop at the doors to bars, cafes, gyms and venues from tomorrow, to the relief of some business owners. But mask mandates and capacity limits stay in place for now. Katie Todd and camera operator Marika Habazi went to see what it all means for the Vax Pass places.
Chrissy Morris runs Bear One Fitness Studio on Auckland's North Shore. Since December, she's had to separate her clients into two groups, doing normal classes for vaccinated, then carting fitness equipment down to the Orewa Community Hall to do distanced outdoor classes for those who are unvaccinated. But tomorrow morning, that all changes.
Everything changes. Yeah, it's back to normal, which is incredible. To not have to think about, have they scanned in? Are they showing me their pass? Are they too close together? It's just some sort of normalcy, which is just, a relief.
That relief is shared by people in the hospitality industry, including the co-owner of Vivace restaurant in central Auckland, Mandy Lusk. She says the vaccine mandates have scared off some long-term customers and she doesn't think they'll come back. They've also caused large bookings to cancel at the last minute, when people have realised some of their group weren't vaccinated. Business owners can continue using vaccine passes, but Ms Lusk won't be one of them.
We are overjoyed that it's going. It felt a little bit at times like we were being blackmailed. We were being forced to become police, if you like, for something that discriminated against some people for their own beliefs, and it made it really, really hard.
But that policing will still be required for masks and capacity limits while the country remains at the red light setting. Mandy Lusk says she expects many office workers to continue working from home, meaning foot traffic will be subdued until the orange light.
It'll be really, really good to get back. To be honest, that will probably make more, dropping to orange makes far more of a difference to us as a business than the vaccine mandate.
A few streets away, the owner of the Shakespeare Hotel, Restaurant and Brewery describes the change as turning a corner after a tough 4 months. He says it's one less job for his stretched workforce to do. But Sunny Koshal is also eager for the traffic light to shift to orange. He says it's far too late to save many businesses in the city centre.
So many venues in Auckland, even here in this street, this is the only one which is left surviving. All the restaurants and big bars have unfortunately shut down. They could not sustain, they could not survive in that kind of mandates or, the vaccine pass stringent laws.
Vaccine passes will no longer be required from 11:59 p.m. tonight. At the same time, vaccine mandates will also lift for staff at schools and early childhood centres, police and the Defence Force.
Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Let us know what you think of the fact we're staying in red for the moment. The Prime Minister says still too many people in hospital. Government's yet to make a decision on whether we need an extra booster shot. And red means still a limit of 200 indoors. Let us know your thoughts. You can text me, Pātui Mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Later on, we're going to do an interview about chips, the kind you eat. Let us know what you think makes a great crisp as well. The curtain comes down on the international career of Black Caps batter Ross Taylor today. After 16 years playing for the New Zealand side, Taylor is turning out for the 450th and final time in the third and final one-dayer against the Netherlands. The 38-year-old bows out, widely regarded as one of the country's greatest cricketers, with the numbers to more than back it up. Clay Wilson is in Hamilton for today's match and he joins us now. Isn't it an emotional day there, Clay?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, it certainly has been, and that was evident from the very start of the game when the national anthems were played. And actually that was a special request. We don't usually get the anthems before games like this in a series like this for the Black Caps, but a special request from Ross Taylor. He had his 3 kids out there beside him and also his great mate and teammate Martin Guptill beside him, and we really saw him fighting back the tears. And by the end of those national anthems, some definite tears rolling down the eyes there for Ross Taylor. And then we saw it just around half an hour ago when he came out to bat. There wasn't a person left on their seat here at Seddon Park. A standing ovation from everyone, and then a nice touch from the Netherlands team, a guard of honour for him to walk through out to bat for his last international appearance out in the middle of the crease. So very, very emotional, and perhaps some more to come later on as well.
Yeah, and Ross Taylor's always been a fan favourite, so what kind of hole does he leave in that respect?
Yeah, well, you go all the way back to his debut for this team way back in March of 2006, and he was just someone who people warmed to instantly. He had that way about him, and also his style of play, I think, made him a fan favourite with the cricket fans. And also, he's been there for almost everything this team has been through over the last 16 years. You talk about 10 World Cup finals, both one-day World Cup finals with the Black Caps, and of course, who could forget that World Test Championship final last year, where it was so fitting that he was the man that got to whip away the winning runs in that match. And also, we've learned a little bit about Ross Taylor and the things that he loves that have certainly helped people warm to him. His love of KFC, his love of a glass of red wine after a match, and also the thing that's really been a trademark of him out in the middle, that pukana, that tongue out celebration that we've seen in all 40 times he's brought up 100 runs in international cricket. So just someone that's going to leave a big hole.
And what about tributes from around the world?
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of tributes flowing in, and New Zealand Cricket actually put out a social media post yesterday which really showed the respect and the mana that Ross Taylor has, not only here in New Zealand, the likes of Kane Williamson, Brendan McCullum, Daniel Vittori, all current or former Black Caps captains, but then you talk about players from around the world, the likes of Indian Rahul Dravid and Virat Kohli, Kumar Sangakkara from Sri Lanka, and current England captain Joe Root. So like I say, it just shows how much respect and sort of the esteem he has held in around the world and in New Zealand.
And it looks like a beautiful day there, Clay. What is actually happening in the match right now?
Yeah, it's a stunning evening for a game of cricket. I'll just peer over my left shoulder here, and the Black Caps actually lost a few wickets just recently, 270 for 6 with just a couple of overs to go. They were going great guns earlier on, hundreds to both Martin Guptill and Will Young are both now out, and Ross Taylor unfortunately could only manage 14 in his final innings, but he went out the way he came in, nice and aggressive. He managed to get 1-6 away, so although he'll be disappointed, certainly we got to see a glimpse of that style that we've come to know and love over the years.
Thanks, Clay. Good to talk. It is Clay Wilson there in Hamilton today for that match. Ash Vegas to Las Vegas. A Kiwi tenor is basking in Grammy Gold after a recording he features on took away top honours at the awards held in the entertainment capital of the world. Simon O'Neill, who hails from Ashburton, sang solo in the Los Angeles Philharmonic recording of Mahler's Symphony No. 8, which won the award for Best Choral Performance, one of 2 Grammys it was nominated for. And he joins us live from Munich in Germany, where he is on a job. Simon, have you managed to get any sleep?
Oh, good morning. Good morning, you guys. I've actually just had an hour and a half little bit of kit just so I'm nice and sharp for the interview with you this morning, Lisa. I was starting to get a bit tired there because I had the flight and just landed yesterday from New Zealand to Munich, which was snowing and -3 degrees, but it looks to be a gorgeous day out there today. Yeah, I'm over the moon.
Adrenaline pumping?
I've got a little bit of sleep. A little bit of adrenaline pumping, tell the truth, yeah.
It's pretty amazing, though, isn't it?
I'm absolutely delighted. Yeah, it was amazing that the recording got a nomination late last year, which really surprised me. But it's a beautiful piece of music for a start. But we're really proud of the actual recording. It used some new technology in actually recording the work. That's why it was, I guess, hailed for some of those engineering nominations. But to get the best choral Grammy, yeah, I'll take that. I am so proud to be part of that team.
Tell us a little bit about your role in the recording.
Yeah, sure. Look, Marla wrote this Symphony No. 8. It's called the Symphony of 1,000 because at its very first, premiere back in 1909, 1910, it had 1,000 people on stage performing it. So in my recording, we have nearly 400. So we have 100 in the orchestra, a few hundred in the various choirs, and then we have a group of soloists, and I'm one of them out the front. So he wrote the first part of the symphony is written in Latin. Of course, when we think of symphonies, we think, symphonies are just orchestral alone. But remember, Beethoven, 100 years earlier, put voices into symphony. So, of course, that's what Mahler's done. And then the second part of the symphony is in German, and that's is taken out of Goethe's Faust story. And, yeah, I get to sing some gorgeous arias and solos in it. And, yeah, I'm over the moon that we've won the thing.
So more than 340 people involved in the recording. Did you all get an invite to the Grammys?
Oh, that is yes. Golly, I was really hoping I was going to get an invite to the Grammys, but back in, of course, the Grammys got postponed until last night. Of course, we were originally supposed to be in Los Angeles. I was waiting there, thinking, "Where is my invite?" It never turned up. I put it down to COVID, but really, there are many, many people involved in this recording, and ultimately, when there's such a large number, the Academy chooses one person to represent, and that is the conductor, a very famous man and an immense musician called Gustavo Dudamel. So he is the guy who will actually get the Grammy Award himself. I doubt that he'll send it round us to have a few days each with us a year. I'd love him to do that, but he won't.
Hey, I bet you... Is your daughter a bit miffed at you then that she didn't get to go to the Grammys?
I know Violet. Oh, she loved that. She was a bit embarrassed when I put her in the original press release, I guess, that I'd been nominated. But yeah, all my kids would love to have come up. My twins, Tom and Grace and Violet. We could have gone up as a family with my wife Carmel. It would have been great, but no. With the end of MIQ and everything had to be stay in New Zealand. But I will see them in a couple of months in America. We'll celebrate as a family then.
Yeah, you work offshore for months and months in a given year, right, to perform your craft at the highest level. Does being involved in an award like this make that sacrifice worth it?
Oh, it is a sacrifice, Lisa. Thanks for showing a light to that. My family sacrificed greatly for my career. My wife has been behind my career for 30 years now. 25 years. How's that? To get me into this international sort of arena. Yeah, that is one of the downsides, I guess, that people don't see. They see a lot of the glamour being an international opera singer. Fancy opera houses and such, but I'm away for 8 months now, away from my kids and my wife and our 2 little schnauzer dogs, and that's hard. That's really, really hard. So thankfully with technology, I'm able to speak to them all the time. But I'm just so lucky. I've got my own family team behind me that has contributed greatly to my career. So I'm lucky. I'm very lucky like that.
Are you doing something fun in Germany?
I am, well, today I start rehearsal for a big Wagner opera, a 5.5, 6 hour opera called Parsifal. So that's going to be fun for me, but I will go out and I'll probably celebrate with a nice cold German beer sometime later this afternoon, I think. I just, it's a great thing to be part of.
Simon, have you warned them you might be a bit ropey? You've been up all night. Can't they let you off rehearsal for one day?
Well, I think, I flew up from New Zealand yesterday. I had lovely champagne on an early glass of champagne on the flight up from New Zealand. I might be a little ropey today, but I'm going to go back to sleep now and have a couple of hours before I actually start, and I should be okay. I'm what you call a pro, Lisa, at least. No, I'm kidding. I probably will be a bit ropey staying up all night. I've answered so many calls from friends and messages on the internet and stuff, and I'm just so grateful to you and to the New Zealand media as well to put this as part of their stories. It's a wonderful thing for a New Zealand classical musician to get into the sort of, I guess, limelight for a few minutes on our daily media rundown. So thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Well, you enjoy the moment and the cold beer. Congratulations. That is Simon O'Neill joining us from Munich in Germany. He is one of those involved in the recording that won a Grammy today. A lot of you getting in touch about chips. Let's get to some of your feedback. This person says, salt and vinegar is the quickest I have ever heard Hipkins answer any question. Wrong answer, I reckon. Salt and vinegar. Someone else says, my favourite potato crisp, balsamic vinegar and caramelised onion. That's Clive from Dunedin. What is wrong with you? Salt and vinegar? We'll talk more about this shortly. E te iwi Haere nei ia checkpoint calls for an independent investigation into war atrocities in Ukraine. China's COVID-0 strategy creates some hiccups and headaches for exporters. And how do you make the perfect potato chip crisp? We're going to find out after the news at 6, so stay with us. Homai o whakaaro, we would like feedback on anything you've heard on the programme. I'll take your thoughts on chips. There's got to be a better flavour than salt and vinegar. Do get in touch. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email for that magnum opus on the best chip is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now. Ko Evi anō tēnei.
The Prime Minister says now is not the time to ease COVID-19 traffic light settings by dropping down to orange. Jacinda Ardern says case numbers have been falling in Auckland, Wellington and Tairāwhiti, but she says many regions are still seeing a surge in cases and the number of people needing hospital treatment isn't likely to peak in some areas until the middle or end of this month. Cabinet will review the traffic light setting again on April the 14th. Ms Ardern began her media conference this afternoon by saying that Russia must be held to account and answer to the world for its invasion of Ukraine amid claims of troops raping and killing civilians. The Department of Conservation says it's doing all it can to stop fire destroying a national taonga. The large blaze broke out in the world-renowned Awadua Wetlands Conservation Area near Bluff on Saturday night and has burned through at least 1,000 hectares. Doc Murihiku Operations Manager John McCarroll says a dry summer, high winds over the weekend and dry vegetation has aggravated the fire. Unaffordable housing is one of the reasons behind an exodus of Aucklanders leaving the city. Auckland's net loss stood at 13,500 residents last year, a couple of thousand more than previous years. Sociologist Professor Paul Spoonley says it's likely the pandemic has played a part with working from home opening up more options. A restaurateur is looking forward to fewer cancelled bookings when vaccine mandates are lifted from midnight. The co-owner of Vivace restaurant in central Auckland, Mandy Lusk, says it'll mean less work for her staff who had to check vaccine passes. And a New Zealand tenor whose performance helped win a Grammy Award says it was a group effort. The recording of Gustav Mahler's Symphony No. 8 featuring Simon O'Neill from Ashburton clinched Best Choral Performance. And just another news on the news of the crisps, anything as long as it's not chicken. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Good to know. Evie is on team, not chicken. We'll have more on the crisps a little later. Do keep the feedback coming on that. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk business. Before we get down to business, Nona, seeing as Evie has lobbed the ball into your court, what's your favourite chip flavour?
Hey, they're lightly salted, thank you.
Okay, you're on my team. Good girl, Nona. Well done. Right, let's move on to the big news in business. Investor interest in New Zealand government bonds is expected to grow. Now, what is the reason for that?
Well, it's been added to the FTSE World Government Bond Index, and that's one of the an index that's out of the UK, and it includes a number of the sovereign debt from a number of big countries, 20 of them around the United States, the UK, Germany amongst them. And what it's good for is really to bring more attention to New Zealand bonds market, and it could potentially help us in the future, perhaps, by making it easier or perhaps even cheaper for the government to borrow more money and attract a wider pool of investors as a result. So it'll be interesting to see how that transpires over time.
And what's been going on with oil prices?
Yeah, oil prices are quite interesting. We've had a lot of developments in recent days, and as a result, the prices dropped quite significantly from over the weekend. So we saw oil slide 13% last week. That was the biggest weekly fall in 2 years. And at the moment, it's trading around $104.58 US dollars a barrel. Now, the reason why is that there's about 30 countries that have got together and decided they're going to release some of their reserves. So for, say, the United States, they're looking at releasing 180 million barrels over the next 6 months. That's 159 liters per barrel, so to speak. And that would be like 1 million barrels extra a day. So that's to ease the perceived shortage because, Russia is the largest exporter of oil. There's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes as well. For example, the European leaders basically said that they wanted to phase out fossil fuels from Russia by 2027. These are mixed messages in terms of what it means for oil, but what it means for inflation is that inflation is really not going to be making a whole lot of difference as a result of this drop. And that's because the expectations in our own market are quite high. We've got consumers expecting inflation to top up at 6%. And businesses at 5.5%. Those are high numbers. And when the Reserve Bank meets next week to discuss monetary policy, chances are they'll still be moving towards raising interest rates because of that very high inflation that we're seeing.
Okay, put your running shoes on, Nona, and let's go for a blat around the market.
All right, so the local top 50 index, it closed down about 0.33%. That was a 36-point drop to 12,053. That's more in line with what we're seeing overseas. Lots of mixed messages there. The New Zealand dollar, though, is steady at 69.3 US cents, 92.3 Australian, and 52.9 British pence.
And hey, Nona, you're all about the details, right? So I need to know, thick cut chips or thin ones?
Oh, I like the thin.
Oh, no. Okay. Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. That's Nona Peltier with Business News. The whole country will stay at red in the traffic light system until at least the end of next week. The Prime Minister says cases are coming down and the country's moving in the right direction, but now is not the time to ease restrictions. Now, that means indoor events and venues will remain capped at 200 people. Paul Dainty, promoter, president and CEO of entertainment company TEG Dainty, joins us now. Paul, what does this mean for you? Where does it leave you?
Oh, look, it's frustrating, and I understand the balancing act that government has, but, we've been waiting, as you know, for a long, long time, and we got good news recently when we were able to get confirmation we could stage shows like Guns N' Roses, which are in large stadiums in Auckland and Wellington, but these restrictions that are still in place for, shows at all the arenas in New Zealand. We've got bands like Kings of Leon, and they've got sold-out shows there that we're having to reschedule and keep rescheduling with all the uncertainty that surrounds it. It's a real problem for all the promoters in the industry.
Yeah, and you've got Chris Rock coming in August, right? Inside venue. What if
Same
you can
issue.
only? Yeah, if you can only have 200 people, what happens then?
Well, it wouldn't look if we only have 200 people, you'd cancel the shows. You couldn't do it. I mean, the financials, the modelling, it just doesn't work financially, obviously.
And what does that do long term? To your ability to attract big names? I mean, we're at the end of the world anyway, so if you're cancelling people or putting them off, how do you get them back again?
Well, it's tough. I mean, I spend most of my week at the moment talking to agents and managers in the US and UK, and one of their first questions is what's going on in New Zealand? Can we get there? And, so everyone's focusing more and more on just playing Australia and bypassing New Zealand.
What do they think when you tell them what's going on in New Zealand and the rules that still exist here?
Look, we try to explain that, you're probably a few months behind the Australian situation, but it's hard because they look through a lens of the rest of the world, which is UK, America, which is wide open, no restrictions. So they're all looking through that lens. So it's a tough sell.
And how much advance notice do you need? Because obviously there's another review, it's just before Easter, and there'll be scheduled reviews after that if there's no change. So how long do you leave it?
Well, we've got Chris Rock, for instance, in August. So, we have to let him know soon. I'd like to think that the next announcement is, a positive one, that we can run full capacity shows like we are here in Australia. That's a very hard question to answer, but, sooner than later we need to know.
What is your venue capacity for Chris Rock?
It's around 11,000 at Spark Arena in Auckland and 9,000 in Christchurch.
And overall, Paul, you referenced this, it's been a hellish couple of years for the entertainment industry, but what has it done to you, COVID, as an industry?
Oh, it's almost reinvented the industry because a lot of people who worked in the industry, and it's quite a specialised industry, a lot of different skill sets within the business. A lot of people, 2 years of virtual shutdown, no revenue, no action at all. A lot of people have left and gone into other, moved where they live, discovered another life, got out of the industry, and now we're trying to, get back and create a lot of activity. And it's been very tough with staffing right across, as you know, entertainment and hospitality, getting people back into the industry. And we don't have people coming in from overseas for a long time. A lot of those people went to work in America and the UK. So it's a bit of a mess. So we're still, even though in Australia we're out of COVID and we're back to business as normal, it's still going to take some time to get to real normality. My guess is next year before we're really back to some sort of new normal.
Is it possible still to get insurance for these kind of events?
You can't get insurance for anything that's COVID related. So, as a company, we always insure our events because there's so much involved cost-wise in putting these big-scale events on. But, COVID as of now, right now, insurance is not available. So there's still that risk element.
So if the government don't change the settings, Paul, you're not eligible to call in your insurance. Does that count as a COVID situation? Do you know?
Well, it becomes a force majeure then. And that gets very technical and legal because not one size fits all. So it's sort of case by case.
Yeah. Hey, so here in New Zealand, we're not allowed to dance at the moment in venues. That takes a bit of the joy away, doesn't it?
Well, you better all come to Australia.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. That is entertainment promoter Paul Dainty there. As he says, up in the air for those guys because they've got indoor venues that are way over the cap that we currently have. It is 17 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. From tomorrow, vaccine mandates are gone for teachers, Defence Force and staff at places you've needed your vax pass. Teachers who had to stop working because they aren't vaccinated can begin the process of returning to class. School leaders are juggling worried parents, returning staff and keeping vulnerable students safe. Louise Tues reports.
For the last 4 months, anyone working in education has needed a double dose to be on the school grounds. An estimated 96% of school and early childhood staff have been, but a few thousand opted against, and no jab meant no job. From tomorrow, that all changes.
My initial feeling was feeling a little bit left down. It was such a big job to enforce the mandate in the schools, kind of had that real feeling of what was the point.
Principal of Jean Batten Primary School, Nadi Leonard, says some of her staff got vaccinated just to keep their job. Others have been working remotely. She says the whole process has been pretty unsettling.
But when you get over it, you realise change always causes some sort of friction where people have to take a side.
She says keeping the peace between all staff will be the next focus.
Reintroducing them back into, the whānau gathering here at school. Not quite sure how that will be received. Have to do a little bit of work around it to ensure that we can have some harmonious relationships again in the workplace.
Nadi Leonard says some parents don't like the idea of unvaccinated teachers in the classroom and are keeping their children at home.
And not sending their child back to school this term, I think, is actually a voice in itself. That group can grow if you allow it, if we don't get that communication open as soon as we can.
The Ministry of Health says nearly 54% of 5 to 11-year-olds have had their first dose of the vaccine and just 5% have had their second. Auckland Primary Principals Association and Principal of Newmarket Primary School, Wendy Coford, told 9 to Noon some parents are just waiting a bit longer.
It's quite likely that we might have another surge in June, July. We know we've got that flu season coming. We've also got those students that have had COVID, so that also has put a little bit of a block on that second vaccination.
She says mandates have given schools time to ramp up safety measures in the classroom.
But it also provided some space for us to get our CO2 monitors working, to get our air purifiers in place, to have the mask wearing habituated, if you like, in our schools, and sanitize.
But President of the Post-Primary Teachers Association, Melanie Webber, says some schools still need help with their ventilation and are waiting on CO2 monitors and air purifiers.
Unlucky the school I teach at is a lovely new build that has a very good ventilation system. There's huge inequity in our system with those CO2 monitors and the machines coming in where they're required. There are considerable delivery issues going on.
Schools and early childhood services have reported 34,000 cases affecting staff or pupils in the last 10 days. Half the schools in the North Island and 3/4 of those in the South Island are dealing with cases of COVID-19. It's 11,000 fewer than the same time last week. It has schools hoping for better attendance next term, with term 1 ending in less than 2 weeks.
It is 5:45. It's time for some of your feedback now on the red light setting, the fact that we're staying at it. Meg says, I'm a vulnerable over 65-year-old, and for me the relaxation of mandates just makes me more vulnerable, certainly not freedom for us. Another person says, I love going to cafes and restaurants. Sadly, no longer safe to sit in a restaurant without a mask to eat and drink, alongside the unvaccinated. Not safe. Edwin says, happy to stay in red in Auckland, protecting the health system and workers especially, and each other still. Roger says, there's no way I'm ready to go to a bar and restaurant that allows non-vaccinated people or fails to check. It is far too soon. On a lighter note, we've been asking you for your chippy preferences. This person says, Lisa, what? Salt and vinegar is the only flavour worth talking about. Don't text me again. Stephen says, Chris Hipkins is onto it. Cannot beat salt and vinegar chips. Here we go. Sam from Wellington. Long-time listener, first-time texter. Snacker Changi salt and vinegar or sour cream, chive and onion. Can't beat them. Sam, that just, I don't know. And someone else says, proper chips made in Nelson are the best. The apple cider and vinegar flavour, my favourite. What happened to good old, just plain old salty ones, eh? Keep the text coming, 2101. The tide of people moving out of Auckland for greener pastures in other parts of the country has increased during the pandemic. 24,500 people have left the city in the past 2 years. Last year in particular, thousands more left the city than in a normal year. Amy Williams has the story.
The flow of people moving out of Auckland is a long-held trend in our internal migration patterns. The city gets its influx of people from births and international arrivals when borders are open. But it appears COVID has accelerated people's plans to leave the big smoke. Charlotte Connolly is among them.
Where we lived, everything was half an hour away, whether it was the doctor or the scooter park or the library or the water or whatever. And I guess further afield than that, then you had the traffic, and sometimes that half an hour was more than that.
She and her family moved out of Auckland in the new year after she got a job offer she couldn't turn down, and now live in Bay of Plenty.
Where we're located now, the water's a kilometre down the road, the school's 500 metres up the road. All the outdoor activities that we like, water sports, biking, all those kinds of things, they're all just on our doorstep and really accessible.
Former Aucklander Tessa Silliphant stayed in the city for job opportunities when she arrived here from England 16 years ago. She moved to Methven at the end of last year, chasing a long-held dream to live in the South Island and also own a home.
I know I can't afford to buy a house in Auckland, so longer term I wanted to be able to
be in an area that I wanted to settle longer term, and I wasn't quite sure where that would be, but I knew it would like to be somewhere in the South Island.
Auckland's net loss stood at 13,500 residents last year, a couple of thousand more than previous years. Auckland Council's chief economist Gary Blick says housing affordability, alongside the city's livability and productivity, are to blame for the fall. In a quarterly update, he says a large and successful city would expect to gain residents, with more moving into the city than leaving. Sociologist and Massey University Distinguished Emeritus Professor Paul Spoonley says the pandemic has also likely played a part in many people's decisions to move.
Well, I think it's very much a function of COVID and the possibilities of either people losing their jobs in the main centres and looking to move somewhere else, perhaps a little cheaper, or the possibility that they're now working from home or from a distance, and so they have new possibilities of where they can live and work.
Working from home has certainly opened up options for many. Charlotte Connolly says when they moved to Plymouth Point near Tauranga, her husband kept his corporate job in Auckland.
We didn't feel the necessary pressure to change his situation at this stage. And I guess that's where COVID, I think, in some ways has kind of benefited a lot of us, because he can work from home 2 days a week. So it really only means he's in Auckland 3 days a week.
As international borders open, it's expected Auckland will again attract migrants wanting to make their home here. But Paul Spoonley says there will also be a brain drain.
As we saw at the end of the global financial crisis, there will be a very significant outflow from New Zealand. It is very concerning. I mean, we often talk at the level of a firm about the challenges of recruiting in a very tight labour market or retaining people. And I think we've got to think about that as a country.
He says with COVID still circulating, it's difficult for modellers to predict how many people will leave New Zealand and by how much Auckland might grow.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is urging an independent investigation into the atrocities in Bucha, near Ukraine's capital city, Kiev. Images show civilian bodies strewn in the streets, and it's feared hundreds have been killed around the capital. Russian forces are now retreating from the towns and villages near Kiev, but they're leaving horror and destruction in their wake. CNN's Fred Pleitgen reports.
As Russian forces retreat from the area north of Kiev, in their wake, scenes of utter destruction. Whole blocks of houses flattened, Ukrainian authorities saying they believe dead bodies are still lying underneath. But here, the dead also lay in the open. Ukrainian National Police showed us this mass grave in Bucha, saying they believed up to 150 civilians might be buried here, but no one knows the exact number. People killed while the Russian army occupied this town. This is what it looks like when the hope is crushed. Vladimir has been searching for his younger brother, Dimitri. Now he's convinced Dimitri lies here, even though he can't be 100% sure. The neighbor accompanying him with strong words for the Russians. Why do you hate us so much, she asks. Since the 1930s, you've been abusing Ukraine. You just want to destroy us. You want us gone. But we will be. Everything will be okay. I believe it. Video from Bucha shows bodies in the streets after Russian forces left the area. Some images even show bodies with hands tied behind their backs. The Russian Defense Ministry denies killing civilians and claims images of dead civilians are, quote, fake. But we met a family just returning to their house in Borodyanka, which they say was occupied by Russian soldiers. They show us the body of a dead man in civilian clothes they had found in the backyard. His hands and feet tied with severe bruises and a shell casing still laying nearby. Russia's military appears to have suffered heavy losses before being driven out of the area around Kiev. This column of armored vehicles in Bucha completely destroyed. The way the Ukrainians tell us is that the Russians were trying to go towards Kiev and they were then intercepted by Ukrainian drones, artillery, and also the Javelin anti-tank weapons. It's not clear how many Russians were killed here, but they say many were, and others fled the scene. A national police officer says the Russian troops were simply too arrogant. They thought they could drive on the streets and just go through, he says, that they would be greeted as though it's all right. Maybe they think it is normal to drive around looting, to destroy buildings and to mock people, but our people didn't allow it. And now it appears all the Russians have withdrawn from here. Ukraine says it is now in full control of the entire region around Kyiv. But it is only now that the full extent of the civilian suffering is truly coming to light.
It is 6 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. For coastal Southland, it is the driest summer on record, and there's no real relief forecast as the drought pushes into the north of the region. With meat and milk prices, there were hopes for a bumper season for the region's farmers. But as Timothy Brown reports, instead it has been a perfect storm of pain.
Dean Rabbage runs a dual dairy and sheep and beef farm at Glenham, near Wyndham in rural Southland.
The family's been on the farm since 1889. But I've been back home farming for probably about 15 years now.
And driest summer you've seen?
Ever, yep. Yeah, it's driest summer my father's seen as well. So we've probably seen that just as dry for some months, but not as prolonged and not as late in the years or in the season as this.
With meat and milk prices high, many in the region had hoped for a season which would bring some breathing room. Instead, it's brought the opposite.
Milk volume's definitely dropping. It was always a tight season. We were off to a terrible start, being too wet, ironically. And now that pain's come on with the dry as well, that milk production's dropped. Like our dairy farm grew 7 kilos of dry matter per hectare a fortnight ago, just in a 1 week period. And we sort of require between 45 and 50 kgs of dry matter per hectare.
Meaning dry matter growth isn't even at 20% of what's needed. NIWA meteorologist Chris Brandolino says while some rain is expected in the next fortnight, there's not a lot of good news in the longer term.
Above normal rainfall for the next 3 months is pretty darn unlikely. So our expectation is that we'll see, unfortunately, probably not an abundance of rain, you could say, for that region.
Mr Brandolino says it's the driest summer in March in Invercargill since records began back in 1900. He says a meteorological drought exists in the region and it'll take persistent rainfall to counter its effects.
Once it does start to rain more regularly, while meteorological drought may end, the impacts may persist for several weeks thereafter.
Environment Southland Chief Executive Rob Phillips says the situation is desperate and will have flow-on effects for months.
Water underpins Southland, full stop, but especially agriculture, critical. We've got a situation, we're going into a winter. So this dry means that there's real pressure on winter crops getting established. Southland needs those winter crops to get it through the winter.
The council introduced an irrigation ban for the entire region last week before rolling it back in parts of Southland. Mr Phillips says they'll review the ban regularly because they know how important water is to the region's livelihood. Federated Farmers Southland President Chris Dillon says the damage has already been done, with farmers' confidence shaken.
The ban was very ill thought out for a start. To knock irrigation in an area where they're using it to grow feed and shorter feed was just ludicrous.
Mr Dillon says making matters worse is a lack of capacity at meat processors due to a lack of RSE workers and the COVID situation, which means more stock remains on farm.
What we need to do is move stock out of the area. The processing capacity has been limited due to the COVID situation, which has ultimately snowballed this into the situation we're in now.
And the effects of the drought aren't limited to farms. Water restrictions are in effect in Invercargill, Gore and Matoda, and a fire is still burning through 1,000 hectares of conservation wetlands at Awarua. Department of Conservation Murihiku Operations Manager John McCarroll says the dry conditions have made battling the scrub blaze harder.
There was some dry hot weather winds that have really fanned those flames and turned it into quite a significant fire with several different fronts.
The entire Southland region remains under a total fire ban.
Let's get to your feedback. We'll start with the important stuff, the mandates, the red light setting and getting rid of vax passes. This person says not sure why businesses are so relieved at dropping the vaccine pass requirement. Most vaccinated people I know won't be going to cafes, etc., which don't require vaccination. And a teacher's got in touch to say, I go back to teach at school next term, having been on sick leave this term. I am fully vaccinated with a terminally ill partner. The greatest risk is not to children. The greatest risk is to teachers like me who followed all medical and COVID advice. I will be wearing a Vaxxed to the Max t-shirt to be sure no one thinks I am one of the anti-vax brigade because of my absences this term. Many of our parents and most of our children are not vaccinated. They are the risk to each other and to me. And let's move on to something a little lighter, which is the chips. We've been asking you about what you reckon the best flavours are. Someone's got in touch to say garden medley, best I've ever tasted. Right, controversial, here's why. I think a chip, a crisp, is a potato. Garden medley is all other tubers, isn't it? Carrots, kumara, etc. They aren't crisps. Let me know your thoughts. Someone else says Heartland thick cut maple bacon flavour. Are you kidding? Another person says roast lamb with rosemary and lamb and mint. Are they chips? Are chips flavoured after meat? Really? And another person says just plain salted chippies. Yes, with happy childhood memories of hunting for salt in its twist of blue paper. Bliss. And another individual says can't get through a day without a packet of chips. I used to be a chicken or sour cream and chives girl, but now it's only ready salted. Can't beat them, says Anna. Another person is mourning the passing of prawn cocktail flavoured chippies. Really? And this one, why would you want to contaminate chips with artificial flavourings? Sea salt rules, says John from the Bay of Islands. Love you, John.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. New Zealand will remain at the red traffic light setting for at least 10 more days, with the Prime Minister warning now is not the time to move to orange. The average number of daily case numbers is trending downwards, but Jacinda Ardern says the hospital system is still under pressure. She says the public health advice is to stay in red a while longer.
We're doing well, but we're still in a large Omicron outbreak in New Zealand. And while we're moving in the right direction, we're not out of the woods yet.
The Prime Minister says the settings will be reviewed again next Thursday, April the 14th, before Easter weekend. The COVID-19 Response Minister says several factors will be taken into account when parts of the country are eventually moved to the orange setting, but nowhere is ready to yet. Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint daily case numbers, infection rates, hospitalisation rates and what parts of the population are in hospital will all be taken into account before any restrictions are eased.
How many cases are we seeing on a daily basis? How many hospitalisations? How many new hospital admissions, as well as those who are in hospital? But also the demographics. We do look at the demographics of those, the complexity of the cases in hospital. So we look at something called case weightings, because not every hospitalisation is equal.
Chris Hipkins says economically speaking, it makes no sense to move parts of the country down a setting only to see case numbers spike again. A major promoter says the uncertainty around the traffic light system is causing major problems for the entertainment sector, with indoor events and venues remaining capped at 200 people. Paul Dainty, the president and CEO of entertainment company TEG Dainty, says that makes it difficult to plan.
We got good news recently when we were able to get confirmation we could stage shows like Guns N' Roses, which are in large stadiums in Auckland and Wellington, but these restrictions that are still in place for, shows at all the arenas in New Zealand that we're having to reschedule and keep rescheduling.
Paul Dainty says managers in the US and UK are now reluctant to book gigs in New Zealand because of the uncertainty. The Prime Minister says there's evidence of Russia committing war crimes. Jacinda Ardern says reports of Russia killing, raping and wounding Ukrainian civilians are beyond reprehensible. She says it's up to the International Criminal Court to officially determine Russia has committed war crimes.
But every piece of evidence points to the fact that there are war crimes being committed by Russia in Ukraine at the hands of the President, Vladimir Putin.
Jacinda Ardern says Russia must be held accountable for its actions. She says the government will unveil further action it's taking against Russia this week. More people have moved out of Auckland for greener pastures around the country during the pandemic. Auckland's net loss stood at 13,500 residents last year, a couple of thousand more than previous years. Charlotte Connolly is one of those who have left for lifestyle reasons and a job opportunity. Sociologist Professor Paul Spoonley says it's likely the pandemic has played a part in many people's decisions to move, with working from home opening up more options. Auckland Council's chief economist, Gary Blick, believes housing affordability is another reason, with house prices soaring 40% in the past 2 years. Federated Farmers says Southland's drought has been exacerbated by a lack of meat processing capacity. Water restrictions and an irrigation ban are in place for several parts of the region. The Southland president, Chris Dillon, says farmers need to get stock into meat processors to ease the strain on the supply of feed. However, he says a lack of overseas workers from the RSE scheme and the Omicron outbreak have caused a bottleneck.
What we need to do is move stock out of the area. The processing capacity has been limited due to the COVID situation, which has ultimately snowballed this into the situation we're in now.
Chris Dillon says there are areas of the country with excess feed and farmers should be relocating stock. Still in drought-stricken Southland, a new fire break is being established at the head of the Tues Peninsula to try to slow a blaze in a significant wetland. The fire has burnt through about 1,000 hectares in the Awadua Wetland Conservation Area in 48 hours. Fire and Emergency Controller Mark Mawini says firefighters are preparing for 40 km/h wind gusts this evening as a change comes through. Mr Mawini says a crew of 7 personnel will patrol the break overnight and 2 helicopters will be on standby. He says tomorrow's conditions should make it easier for crews, with winds dropping and turning westerly. And in sport, centuries to Will Young and Martin Guptill have helped the Black Caps post an imposing 333 for 8 in the final one-dayer against the Netherlands in Hamilton. Young made 120 and Guptill 106 as they put on 203 for the second wicket. Ross Taylor in his final innings for New Zealand scored 14. The Netherlands will need 334 to win and stop the Black Caps making a clean sweep of the 3-match series. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, historical novelist Deborah Challenor on her latest work, The Leonard Girls, looking back at the Vietnam War from a Kiwi nurse's point of view. The BBC asks if fish can count. Charlotte Cook continues her examination of female body hair, and we are fog-bound for this week's Moment of Calm. All on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
And you can download the RNZ app to your phone to listen live or listen again. You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For the North Island, except Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine at first, apart from isolated showers in Northland. It's cloudier tomorrow with showers possibly heavy in Taranaki at night. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with high cloud tomorrow. Looking at the South Island, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, cloud is increasing. There's rain for Fiordland, spreading north tomorrow with heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. Nelson and Marlborough except the Kaikoura coast, mainly fine at first. Scattered showers are developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain from the evening with heavy falls possible. The Kaikoura coast, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Areas of cloud is expected and patchy drizzle from Kaikoura to North Otago, clearing tomorrow morning. Mainly fine elsewhere, but scattered rain for the far south, spreading north tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with drizzle at times. It's 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Evie, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. You're a sensible woman who reads the news, so we need a final call from you. Thin chips or thick ones, please?
Oh, thin all the way.
Okay, all right then. Moving on. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Salty, deep-fried bits of sunshine, chips, crisps is what we are talking about. You may have eaten a few during lockdown. Well, apparently the Aussies did too. And now Nelson-based company Proper Crisps is expanding further across the ditch, opening a manufacturing plant in the Yarra Valley near Melbourne to make tailor-made crisps for the Aussie market with Aussie spuds to boot. Well, joining us now is Andy Leonard, who is General Manager for Proper Crisps. Andy, what is the difference between an Aussie and a Kiwi spud, please?
Afternoon, Lisa. Well, not all potatoes are grown the same. And the potato that we've made our name off the back of across the last 12, 15 years in New Zealand is the Agria. It's a beautiful tasting potato, yellow, golden colour, but no Agria grown in Australia. So we've scoured Australia high and low to find a match for Agria, and we think we've done it.
And what is this special spud that the Aussies are going to be using, or you're going to use in your manufacturing in Aussie?
Oh, it's a combination of factors. Colour's a big one for us, and taste. A lot of people comment on our product that you can taste the potato. We don't over-season, so the potato's super important for us because we don't throw too much seasoning at it. We've landed on 3 varieties in Australia, and they need to grow at various times of the year in various conditions. They need to store through the season, and there's lots that you need these potatoes to do. So fair bit of work just to select the right potato.
So you've tested them up the wazoo, tested them and put them through the rigours of being turned into crisps?
Yeah, absolutely. 2021 was all about testing. We made quite a lot of product in Australia, different times, different batches, etc., different variety potatoes, and we had them. And during COVID, that was pretty challenging. We flew them back to New Zealand and a lot of taste testing, and we're really comfortable with where we landed. In fact, I've just come back from Australia, and I believe that blind taste test, you wouldn't know the difference between our New Zealand agri potato and what we're making in Australia right now.
It's a big commitment to set up a manufacturing plant over there. I mean, how many chips do the Aussies eat?
Well, they had a similar amount to the New Zealanders, actually, and there's 5 times population over there, so it's a big opportunity. And our brand is becoming established, albeit on a fairly small scale at this stage. We've been over there coming up 3 years now, and we're in 1,500 stores across Australia. So a good start, but big market.
Hey, Andy, is there a difference between a chip and a crisp?
Oh, there certainly is. Only proper make crisps, everyone else makes chips.
You seized that marketing opportunity, Andy. Hey, tell me, we've been asking people about their favourite flavours, what they like, etc. As a professional chip maker, what makes a good crisp?
Well, it all starts with the potato. So, we're so appreciative of our potato growers that get everything just right for us there. There's different moisture levels in potatoes at different times of the year, and we deal with that, and then we work on things like slice thickness, time and temperature, and the curve of that temperature and time, which is really artisan. Our guys are chefs, so they're batch cooked, so you can vary with the batch size and all sorts of levers you can pull to make the best crisp.
So, Andy, when you say your product is handmade, what do you mean? That it's just not an automated process, or is at every stage a human involved, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we hand sort potatoes. Once they've come out of the peeler, we'll pick up the potatoes and cut any defects off, or cut them in half to check that there's no issues inside the potato. And then when we batch cook them, we stir the oil to make sure that there's great coverage and there's not too many that are stuck together, which can be a problem at times. And then when we grade the potato, the finished products before they go in the bag, we've got lots of staff physically grading out any colour or other defect. So it is a very hands-on process. So this bigger move into the Australian market, I mean, what percentage of your business would they make up, and what are you trying to achieve? How high do you want it to go? We're sitting about 20% of our sales is in Australia at the moment. We'd see, we've been doubling quite quickly the last couple of years, so we'd see that continuing to double, and I'd say within 2 or 3 years, with potentially 50% of our business could be out of Australia. As I say, it's 5 times the population over there, so if we did reach, the market share we have in New Zealand, obviously that could be quite a good number for us. In terms of the New Zealand spuds, the Agria, where are you getting those from? Predominantly Canterbury. But at certain times of the year for seasonality issues, we'll get them out of Pukekohe, out of South Auckland. Can you tell the difference between a spud that's come from Pukekohe and one that's come from Canterbury? No, not really. No, you'd have to be pretty good to do that. I don't know anyone that can do that. Hey, now let's get to a few really important things that we're having questions on, right? Also, we're having a debate here on the program about what the best flavour is. Your favourite flavour, please? Cider vinegar. Oh, goodness me, you're on team vinegar. Yeah. And when you talked about the fact that the thickness is really important, what is the optimal thickness for said chip to get the best crisp? Well, we actually measure it not in millimetres or anything. It's in a gauge, so the number wouldn't mean anything to anyone. But it does vary depending on the specific gravity or the moisture content in the potato. So we're playing with that thickness all the time, and we work on that to get the right level of crunch. So Sometimes the crunch can be too hard, sometimes it can be too soft. We look for a perfect crunch where it's crunchy, but it's not a gum bleeder for us, and we think that's the perfect crunch.
Okay, one last thing before you go very quickly. A lot of people are aggrieved by the fact that you open a packet of chips these days and it seems to be half full of air. Your thoughts on that?
Well, once again, there is times where we struggle to fit all the chips in the bag. So once again, that'll be the variety of the potato and the seasonality of the potato with different moisture content in it. So sometimes you've got more chips in the bag and sometimes you've got less chips in the bag, down to that fact. So you have to make the bag big enough for the worst case scenario for the potato.
Okay. Do you eat them every day, Andy? Chips? Crisps?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Taste test every day.
Really appreciate your time. That is Andy Leonard there, who is from Proper Crisps, and they're pushing further into the Aussie market. They've got a special manufacturing plant there in the Yarra Valley near Melbourne. Now, the Black Caps have set the Netherlands a big target to chase in Hamilton in the third ODI in Hamilton. It's also Ross Taylor's last international match. He bows out tonight after his 450th, that's a huge number, and final game for New Zealand, and retires as New Zealand's highest ever run scorer. Our reporter Clay Wilson is at the game in Hamilton and joins me now. So Clay, how are the Black Caps going?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. So in about 5 minutes' time, the Netherlands will come out to chase, and as you mentioned, a pretty stiff target for them to chase, 334 to win, and that's after the Black Caps posted 333 for 8 from their 50 overs, hundreds to both Will Young and Martin Guptill. Unfortunately, just 14 for Ross Taylor in his final international innings, but we did still get to see a brief glimpse of what we've come to know and love with Ross Taylor over all these years, one big six, so the crowd did get something to see there. Some cameos at the end from Doug Bracewell and Tom Latham, and the Netherlands, like I say, a pretty stiff target of 334 to chase to try and get to finish the series with a win, consolation win of sorts after the Black Caps won the first two matches of this series.
And what are they going to do to farewell him from international cricket? Do we know what the plans are?
Yeah, so we know a little bit about what's to come tonight. So there will be a special post-match presentation for Ross Taylor. So we understand he's going to be presented with some gifts from New Zealand cricket. There'll also be a speech from New Zealand cricket and former Black Cap Martin Steddon. I also understand that there will be another special element to tonight's presentation. I can't reveal that, but certainly one to watch for cricket fans. But also this won't be the last of Ross Taylor. He has mentioned that he's still keen to play one more season at least for his beloved Central Stags in domestic cricket. So people who want to catch him playing cricket might still be able to get a chance next summer as well.
Ooh, Clay's got some inside knowledge there that he's not sharing with us. That is Clay Wilson live from Hamilton with Ross Taylor's last game there, and Clay is suggesting something special is going to happen when they farewell him from international cricket. It is almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. China's zero COVID strategy is causing headaches for some primary sector exporters. A resurgence of the virus within the country has prompted strict lockdowns, significantly disrupting economic activity and slowing down distribution networks. Here's our rural reporter, Maya Burry.
While life in full lockdown may feel like a distant memory for many New Zealanders, it's a very different picture in China. Right now in Shanghai, life has ground to a halt. The city's 26 million residents have been told to stay home, with most public transport suspended and non-essential services forced to close. And exporters say the disruption is not good for business. PGG Wrights and South Island wool manager Dave Burridge says demand for wool has dropped off because China's manufacturing regions are affected by the restrictions.
Is having a direct impact on bottom line returns to wool growers, which we've seen in the latest auctions. Also, the banks have closed, so a lot of exporters are not able to open their letters of credit. So cash flows is certainly having a major impact as well.
Shanghai is home to the world's busiest container port, which handles billions of dollars of New Zealand's primary sector goods each year. AgriHQ senior analyst Mel Crode says the restrictions in the city are slowing down trucking to and from the port.
As far as we're aware, the shipping is still occurring, but it's just the pure congestion there, the slowing down, the disruption of those the ability to unload and get that product off the port is just flowing back through the system essentially.
While this disruption might cause some short-term headaches, an agri-economist doesn't expect there to be any significant long-term damage. Westpac's Nathan Penny says, broadly speaking, food exporters have come through the COVID pandemic in good shape.
Our exports, which gravitate towards the food sector, restaurants and cafes, if there is going to be any impact, they're likely to be hit harder. Meanwhile, other things, the more staple items, they tend to be more resilient through these sorts of things.
But Nathan Penny says the added supply chain disruption hasn't come at a good time for the apple and kiwi fruit industries, with the first of this season's crop only recently departing for China.
And your feedback's still coming in thick and fast on the crisps. This person says good simple flavours are the best. Sage and onion, rosemary or paprika. While I usually agree that chips are best just potatoes, surely kumara chips also qualify. Pea crisps are pretty good too, says Tess. I don't know. Pea crisps, I don't think they are a chip, are they? And this one from Rach. Rach says, flavoured after meat, of course. We've had chicken chips forever. And she signs off by saying, Rach on her bike, biking off too many chips. Thank you for getting in touch with your feedback. Now, moving on to something a little more serious. Police say multiple shooters were involved in an attack that left 6 people dead and 10 others wounded in Sacramento in California. Police fled through the streets after gunfire rang out in an area packed with bars and restaurants. The BBC's Gareth Barlow has the latest.
Sacramento, California. America's latest mass shooting shattering lives as it shattered the night. In an area packed with restaurants and bars, rapid gunfire rang out in the early hours of Sunday morning.
Investigators are working to identify those responsible for this horrific act. We know that a large fight took place just prior to the shootings, and we have confirmed that there are multiple shooters. Investigators are currently interviewing numerous witnesses.
Videos on social media appear to show the altercation taking place moments before the shooting, which occurred 2 blocks away from the state capitol. As dawn broke over Sacramento on Sunday, so did the stories from witnesses and families of the victims.
I heard gunshots, and then after the gunshots, I heard people just start diving down on the ground and falling down, and the next thing I know, someone fell in front of my truck. I was trying to get out the way, and by the time they got up, I guess I got hit. My truck got hit.
It's not fair. It's not right. I just want to know something. That's all. I just want them to just tell me something. Tell our family something so we can do what we have to do to try to move on a little bit.
The mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg, said thoughts and prayers for those affected were appropriate, but not nearly enough. But with the police still searching for answers and the perpetrators, for the moment, thoughts and prayers are the only solace for heartbroken families.
Staying in California, which has reached the end of its rainy season, and most of the Golden State is already in severe or extreme drought. State officials say the last 2 months have been the driest period in over a century. CNN's Stephanie Elam is near Lake Tahoe.
The beautiful Sierra Nevada mountains. A winter wonderland where people come to enjoy the snow. But this is taking the fun out of it. In California's last snowpack survey of the wet season, just 2.5 inches of snow were measured, containing the equivalent of only 1 inch of water. That's a mere 4% of the April 1st average. Most of the 7 readings here were on dirt and grass.
As of April 1st, where we should be in terms of our snowpack, we should be standing on roughly 5 feet of snow. So my feet should be roughly right here.
Think of the snowpack as a frozen reservoir. The state says it's responsible for about 30% of California's water, including drinking water.
It's a beautiful day out here, but that's actually part of the problem. These rushing waters are because the snowpack is already melting, but not all of this water is going to make it to California's reservoirs, which are already low.
We could be losing it down into the groundwater, down into the soil, so that would also help replenish the groundwater, but at the same time we could lose some through evaporation.
Winter in California started off wet, but hopes of a drought-busting rainy season quickly dried up. By March, the state had notched the driest first 3 months of a year in its recorded history.
Some would consider this a wake-up call. I disagree. The alarm's already gone off. Climate change is here, and it's been here across the American West.
According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, more of Northern California sank into extreme drought. So did parts of Utah and New Mexico. Even worse, parts of Oregon and Nevada are in exceptional drought.
We are encouraging people to do the common sense things.
Last summer, California Governor Gavin Newsom called on residents to cut their water consumption.
A 15% voluntary reduction, not only on residences, but industrial, commercial operations and agricultural operations.
Now the governor is urging local leaders to institute bans on watering grass near commercial and industrial buildings.
From drought to flooding, some northern New South Wales communities are facing months of isolation after weathering 2 major floods in a month. The small town of Huonbrook, 2 hours inland from Byron Bay, is one of them. Massive landslips have wiped out access roads. Even getting there on foot is a challenge. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
It's taking a massive effort to try to reopen access to parts of the remote Byron hinterland behind Mullumbimby. In the community of Huonbrook, volunteers are building a makeshift footbridge over a still flood-swollen creek that's washed away the only access road. For locals like Gus, it's an attempt to make an hour-long trek through bushland a little shorter and easier.
I've just seen if these guys need any help with anything, and I'm just going to get some planks to finish off that bridge there for them. I've got something at home that'll fit.
Apart from the long hike, the only other way for Huonbrook residents to get groceries and other essentials is via helicopter.
But slowly, day by day, you know, people who've got a bit of machinery in here have opened up roads a little bit, got us down the road another 100 metres or so. It's getting easier and easier all the time. Instead of the carry up the hills, like that carry at the bottom of the road up to our places is a 500-foot climb. Every day it presents itself with different things, you know. It might be, OK, I've got to cut all my own firewood now, there's no bringing it home. For income, of course, is your first one. You can't get out to work, you know. As a builder and all of that, you just, it's tough.
Some locals are even using ride-on lawnmowers to get up the final steep hills to their house. Lilith Christopherson has barely left her home for weeks.
I haven't been since the second flood. Previous to this second flooding event, the army had come, the river had calmed down and shrunken greatly to actually just like a stream through this massive gorge. And they created bridges and a really nice access. So at that point then it was literally a 20-minute walk through the rubble, through the creek and onto the other side where vehicles could then access.
And that's all been washed away once again?
Yeah, now all the bridges, all that work has been destroyed.
Without road access, her car is useless, and she can't get into Byron Bay, where her cleaning business is based.
One local man here, he's taken on board a project to see if we can get the Chinook Army helicopter to take out some of our vehicles, especially for people that's their livelihood, their ute and their trailer and all their work tools are stuck up here.
A London teacher has launched a club especially for Muslim women. Miriam Bamyam is behind the club Cake Face. She says she wants to create a safe space for women over the age of 18 to party and let their hair and hijabs down. The BBC's Poonam Tanajay reports.
It's Saturday night in North London and a group of women in Islamic dress make their way to a club with a special door policy.
The policy is no boys, no booze, no babies.
That's Miriam Buyan, teacher by day and DJ by night.
So for me, I like to have fun in kind of mainstream spaces, but I also like to have a private place where I can take off my headscarf. So when I started looking online and doing a bit of research, literally nothing came up. So I wanted to change that.
It's why Miriam launched Club Cake Face, a space where Muslim women can dance and have fun. And it's where I meet teenagers Zara and Maria. Because there are no men here, they're able to remove their headscarves.
We just feel more comfortable, and also we're having fun, but we don't feel like it's wrong, so we don't have that guilty feeling, if you know what I mean.
Just being able to experience like a lot of fun without being like around men.
Do you think also as Muslim women people don't perceive this side of you?
100%, I agree, yeah. We do have fun, but it's in an environment where we're having fun by ourselves, and it's not just for men. Yeah, it's not to like be attractive to men or anything. It's just it's the intention is just for you, and I think that's really special, and I like that. Yeah.
For many of the women here, it's a chance to enjoy themselves without compromising their religious beliefs.
Sometimes we just need to let it out, forget about all the problems, forget about the kids, forget about everything that's going on, and just have a good time. As you know, in Islam, we don't drink, and we don't mingle with other sex.
But what's so good about this place as opposed to going anywhere else, I guess?
Meeting people with same interest, so people who are actually looking for fun.
It's difficult to find a place where we can relax, because normally socializing with people our age is either in the bar drinking or going out to a nightclub or stuff like that, and we are restricted in what we can do because of our religion.
Well, that's pretty much all we've got time for. Oh, just one last thing. Do you know what that is? That is the sound of a crispy plain salt chip, the best flavour there is. Now, the Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. If you've missed anything on the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō, and from 5 a.m. tomorrow, on First Up, how hot was it today in Auckland? Is summer really over? Well, First Up looks at how long the summer hangover might last. Kia te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Mārie. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. New Zealand will remain at the red traffic light setting for the moment, with many parts of the country still facing a surge in COVID-19 cases. It's been revealed that half of the schools in the North Island and 3/4 in the South are dealing with cases of the virus. Rising house prices is being seen as one of the reasons why thousands of people moved out of Auckland last year. And British media are reporting that police have issued fines over a party held at the official residence of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, breaching COVID restrictions. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The cool thing about it is we want to know how the universe has changed since it began, and this is giving us a clean look at stars that existed just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity. You make your own butter.
Yeah, I do. I'm lucky enough to have 300 cows, so if I'm really dying for butter, I can just make my own, and it is really easy to make.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Karen, and I'm getting ready for another night on RNZ National. I'm Brian Kraut. It'll be lovely to have your company from after the news at 7. Just looking at the Met Service. Details for Auckland today, 23.3. That's not that hot, is it? Was it sticky in Auckland? Was it the humidity that really got you? Obviously got someone, or Lisa wouldn't have been talking about it at the end of Checkpoint just a few minutes ago. In this half hour, actually, what's coming up after 7? My first guest is Deborah Challenor, who is a historian. She did a PhD in history, and I think she studied Vietnam. Now she's written a fictional novel based in that country at the height of the Vietnam War, from the viewpoint of a New Zealand nurse posted there. In this half hour, later on, an interview that Jesse Mulligan had with Simon O'Neill, New Zealand tenor, who's part of a team that has just won a Grammy. The Los Angeles Philharmonic. Gustavo Dudamel was the conductor. They performed and recorded Mahler's 8th Symphony, Symphony of 1000. Simon O'Neill was the tenor soloist. And the Kiwi boy has won a Grammy, along with all the other people in the effort. 1,000 of them, I guess, for that recording of that amazing symphony. Simon spoke with Jesse this afternoon. And speaking of Jessie's, Jessie Chang is the host of The Detail tonight, which is talking about local democracy gone bad, or is it central government overreaching itself in Tauranga?
This year, across the country, we'll be voting on who we want as our mayor and who we want on our councils. All of us, that is, except for Tauranga.
Local Government Minister Nanaia Mahuta has scrapped plans for local elections in Tauranga this year. Instead, Nanaia Mahuta announced that the commissioners will carry on for 2 more years until 2024.
The dysfunctional council was sacked in December 2020 and commissioners were installed to run the 5th biggest city in the country.
Well, the challenge for me was to weigh up what has been a very difficult and disparate voice around the governance table for Tauranga City Council. So what I want to do is try and settle that down.
Nanaia Mahuta recently decided that the Tauranga commissioners would stay on, sparking cries from some of democracy being thrown out the window. But it's not the first time commissioners have had to parachute in to run local government in New Zealand.
The government will appoint commissioners to run the debt-stricken Kaipara District Council.
We saw the government passing legislation effectively sacking Environment Canterbury and replacing them with commissioners and deferring elections.
Kia ora, I'm Jessie Chang, and on my last episode for The Detail, how bad do things need to get before commissioners take over, and are they the right call?
Democracy is a wonderful thing, and we sort of need to absolutely preserve it. But every now and again, things go wrong.
Sam Coway is a regional reporter for One News in the Bay of Plenty. He grew up in Tauranga and after stints elsewhere is now living back there.
It's a city that is so beautiful. It's got so much going for it. You've got the busiest port, you've got, fabulous beaches. But it just hasn't kept up with the pace and growth that it needed to.
Property managers there estimate the city is short around 1,000 rental properties, and the ones that are there are skyrocketing in price.
This is a city of 150,000 odd people now, and the community facilities, things like netball courts, sports fields, the last 20 years there's been very little investment in making this a big city with the big city amenities.
But the growing pains of the city have been far from the only problem affecting the area.
So we had an elected council. We had 11 councillors, including a mayor. And we started hearing murmurings of some dysfunction in the council. It sounded like it was a very difficult place to work. You obviously had the executive team who was getting on and doing what they needed to do, but you had a group of councillors in there, some of whom were very experienced and some of whom were quite new. But there were a number of issues going on, and I guess that all came to the front when a report was commissioned and it found that there was just a high-level dysfunction, there was bullying, there was all sorts of antics going on within the council that was having major effects of what was supposed to be getting done and wasn't. Look, those former councillors would probably argue that there was a lot done under their leadership. Many point to the fact that they had a mayor that they didn't really get along with. And some also say that the fight to become the mayor never really finished once Tembi Powell was elected and other councillors wanted to potentially be mayor themselves. So that report came out, and in 2020...
Tauranga Mayor Tembi Powell has resigned after a meeting today, effective immediately.
Tauranga's future as a city of strategic importance to New Zealand cannot be left to a small group of petty politicians who have a long track record of hindering or even worse, stopping progress.
He encouraged, in fact, pleaded the government to get involved and to put commissioners in place. There were a number of different ways that could have looked. They could have put a Crown manager in place, for example, but the local government minister decided no, they would disband the council and put 4 commissioners in place.
Former National MP for the East Coast, Anne Tolley, will chair the team of 4 commissioners. The former Chief Executive of Infrastructure New Zealand, Stephen Selwood, is also on the team. The lineup includes 2 Tauranga locals.
What do the commissioners actually do then?
So the commissioners are pretty much like the council. They are involved in the day-to-day running of the city. They make the big decisions. They came in saying that they really wanted to talk and communicate with ratepayers and members of the city. So yeah, any big decision that's made, council meetings, all of that stuff, they are across it.
And The government decided to extend their role until July 2024. What was the basis for that decision? Because, everyone else around the country, they're getting ready to have local elections.
Yeah, look, I think Nanaia Mahuta did announce this in Tauranga just recently. She decided that it would be extended. She talked about the fact that these commissioners had made great progress. She pointed to the civic precinct building, which will effectively sort of run from 3 blocks down to the waterfront. It'll be about a $300 million spend. And she said it'd be good to have the commissioners oversee that project, to implement the long-term plan, to continue community engagement. Of course, there would be some on the other side of the fence who said